You're listening to Civic from the San Francisco Public Press. We look at Proposition G, a ballot measure that aims to make affordable housing accessible for more extremely low-income seniors, people with disabilities, and families.
I'm always constantly worried about my housing. I don't really feel safe there. I feel like my health is not doing well there, and then the rent keeps increasing.
This proposition is only $8.5 million every year when even in a budget crisis, the city's at $14 billion for our budget. So, this isn't even a slice of pie, this is a crumb.
It's a first step of many to be able to say that we are doing the best we can to help seniors and people with disabilities and families.
I'm Madison Alvarado, and this is Civic. In San Francisco, it's no secret that we don't have enough affordable housing for everyone who needs it. But even for those who are lucky enough to have their names chosen in the city's subsidized housing lottery, a safe place to live can still be out of reach because it's too expensive. This is especially true for some older adults and people with disabilities who live on fixed incomes, as well as extremely low-income families. Devon is an older adult with a disability living in San Francisco, where she and her husband pay just over $900 a month for rent. They moved here in 2008 and have been on the waitlist for affordable housing since. In the meantime, the pair spends most of their income on housing, which is increasingly hard to afford. Devon shared her story with me in Cantonese, with my colleague Zhe Wu interpreting.
I found a place close to the 16th Street. People all say that it was chaotic at that time, so no one was willing to go there to rent. But we saw that it was cheap because we couldn't afford those with higher rent. At that time, when we came out to work, we only get $8 an hour. We have to work at the wage of $8 per hour for 5 years until we got $9 an hour. My husband got a stroke before and couldn't get out to work, so I'm the only one who works, and the biggest spending for my monthly wage is on rent. Other than that, we still need to pay for transportation, the phone bill, and other things. We really don't have any left after paying all those. I couldn't dare to even go to have dim sum with my family because we don't have much extra left to spend. Even in the house we rent, things downstairs were very chaotic. Security is not very good. I still live there. There's a bar downstairs. It's a real safety issue. I feel like I'm constantly endangered. Every night I would walk downstairs and see if the door were closed. Because not just Chinese people live there are some Westerners living there. They didn't take such high regard on safety, so they would leave the wood door open and just shut the iron door frame. There are always many things happening there. It would still be very noisy at 2 a.m. There's cannabis smell, there's the smell of smoke, people smoke, and the smell makes us feel sick. It has been impact on the health, but we could not do anything.
Increasing costs have also led to more stress for the couple. While their previous landlord didn't raise the rent because he understood that they were going through tough times, the building's new owner has been charging more.
My rent would raise every year, even though, like being in San Francisco, we have some kind of rent control, and the city is going to give us a standard of how much the rate of rent increase each year. So this year is like 2.4, but then the thing is our pension is very low and it's not going to increase at the same rate. So for us, like we are not getting paid enough and our income are not catching up with the rent increase, we still need to spend money to eat. The government and the city give us some kind of support, but that's very little. I'm always constantly worried about my housing. I don't really feel safe there. I feel like my health is not doing well there, and then the rent keeps increasing.
She said the new landlord has been pressuring them to leave, but she and her husband have nowhere else to go.
Our landlord would very much welcome if we move out immediately. If they found any problem with you, even if it is very little, they would just send you a lawyer's letter. Like maybe sometime we were a little bit too noisy for people downstairs. They just send a lawyer letter to demand us to do ratification. If you do not ratify, you need to move out in 3 days. We were very afraid of these things because if we got kicked out, we don't know where to rent. For my landlord, if you leave, they could make it over and get $2,000 for rent now. So wouldn't they want you to leave?
Devon has been applying to move into other apartments, but hasn't had any luck because she and her husband don't make enough money, even for affordable housing.
I'm actually not like passive in here. I'm very active. Every time when I hear that there are some application open up, I would just go. And there's a lot of people there, and sometimes you don't even get into the poll. And you spend that much effort trying to get in, and they would end up telling you you don't qualify. This year, we received 2 responses out of all the applications we submitted. One said I was not eligible due to my income being too low. There's nothing we can do about that. We just received the other one, which said that just for studios, it would cost over $1,200. But for us, we just got retired. Even when we were working, our salary was not high, as we often have to take sick leave due to our health issues. Even if I combined my income with my husband's, his earning would still be only half of what I made. So if we combine our income together, we can get about $1,100. If you were in my shoes, could you live in a place with $1,200 rent? There's no way for us to apply for those housing.
She's given up hope for finding affordable housing and worries she and her husband will become homeless.
We're not that interested because with that offer, we still can't afford it. Plus, if one of the partners passed away and you are by yourself, with that couple $100 of income, how can you live in those houses? We sometimes feel very hopeless, like at any time, we will be the people who are homeless.
Unfortunately, Devon's story is not a rare one in San Francisco.
We find that when clients come into our office seeking housing resources, thinking that they can apply for affordable housing, they find out about the harsh reality that they oftentimes do not income qualify for affordable housing, meaning that affordable housing is too expensive for them.
The voice you're hearing belongs to Zach Weisenberger, housing policy analyst at Young Community Developers. Young Community Developers has been working alongside other community-based organizations like Faith in Action Bay Area, Senior and Disability Action, and the Community Tenants Association to put a measure on the ballot that they hope will change things.
We think that this measure will kind of fill a gap and offer opportunities for our clients to be able to actually access the affordable housing system in San Francisco.
So why are existing affordable units so out of reach? The short answer is that subsidized housing, especially for people with extremely low incomes, is expensive to build and operate, and existing subsidies haven't kept up with the need.
It has never been a focus of the city. I think it's just funding. I mean, I know it sounds like a kind of a cop-out answer, but really it's just these units are hard to subsidize, and federal government has, for the last 30, 40 years, failed to help states and municipalities fund affordable housing.
The costs of running these buildings have gone up, according to Lydia Ely, Deputy Director for Housing at the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development.
The costs of operating affordable housing are high everywhere, especially now, and especially in San Francisco. In the last few years in particular, since COVID, we've seen real spikes in operating expenses, including, most notably, insurance, labor costs, a lot of turnover in the industry.
Ely said that all these things contribute to a high operating cost per unit, so owners need to set higher rents to break even. Meg Heisler, campaign manager for the Yes on G campaign committee, explained that to make these projects pencil out, our current system requires tenants meet certain income requirements.
The way we build affordable housing sort of dictates that the rents in the majority of the buildings that the city is building are set at around 50 or 60% of the area median income.
For a single adult in San Francisco, that's about $63,000.
And so if you make less, then it is totally possible that you will wait a very, very long time in order to see a unit that you can qualify for. So the requirements, include like having income that's 2 times the rent, and that sort of excludes a large portion of people right away.
Proposition G tries to work around that issue. If passed, it would help subsidize rent in 550 to 600 units of affordable housing for extremely low-income seniors, people with disabilities, and families.
Prop G would create the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund, which will put $8.25 million annually towards rental subsidies to deepen the rents in affordable housing.
These subsidies would be paid to building owners to cover the difference between the rent that an extremely low-income household can afford and the typical rent set for a household making 60% of the area median income. The fund would start in 2026 and continue for 2 decades, with the city dedicating at least $4 million in the first year and at least $8.25 million every year after that. The allocation could change depending on the city's financial health and budgetary decisions. Each year, the mayor and board of supervisors would decide whether to set aside the minimum amount or a figure that was at most 3% higher than the previous years. In years with a projected budget deficit greater than $250 million, they could reduce the amount for the fund. Most of the money would go towards subsidizing new units. Proposition G targets people in the extremely low-income category who make between 15 and 35% of the area median income. Right now, that's between about $16,000 and $37,000 for a single adult, or between $23,000 and $52,000 for a family of 4. About 66,000 households in San Francisco fit the extremely low-income description, many of them including seniors. Here's Ely from the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to explain why.
The needs of low-income seniors are much more acute simply because so many of them, maybe most of them, are on fixed incomes, and many of them rely on Social Security and SSI and other entitlements that essentially are static. They may go up by 1 or 2% a year, but they don't keep pace with inflation, and they certainly don't account for San Francisco's high housing costs.
The same is true for people with disabilities, who may also live on fixed incomes. Teresa Imperial, executive director of the Bill Soro Housing Program, explained that the older adults her organization works with often end up living in single-room occupancy hotels, and even those can be too expensive.
Their income is at most $1,500, but we're seeing $1,000 even. But an SRO rent, may be around $900 at this point. And so that means 90% of your income is only toward rent, and you don't have any kind of budget or money for food, perhaps other utilities. And that's why you see a lot of seniors in food banks. They're also in other form of assistance, monetary assistance as well. So you're looking into this population that is extremely in a very precarious situation.
According to Heisler, overcrowding and other habitability issues are common experiences among extremely low-income people in San Francisco.
There are families doubled, tripled up across the city. People stay in precarious housing situations. People stay in SROs, units that are far too small for their growing families. In buildings older folks, people with disabilities will be forced to stay in buildings where they can't get up and down the stairs and there's no elevator or no working elevator. So I think people do what they have to do to make it work, but these are not by no means ideal situations for folks to have to stay in. Some people certainly end up homeless or between housing for long stretches of time.
I spoke with Itzel Romero, a housing organizer at Senior and Disability Action. She said that this reality is especially difficult for older adults.
We know that seniors are increasing in terms of the homeless population, and that is something that we also see as a big threat. I think it's hard on anybody at any age, and I think particularly for people who are seniors, who are aging, who are more likely to experience developing a disability at an older age. It's really hard, I think, both physically and emotionally, mentally, to experience homelessness. And I think the real impact is that we're going to see far more seniors who have a lot more trauma and far more seniors who don't have access to healthcare. And that's a really scary place to be in.
For people like Devon, waiting for housing that meets their needs threatens their health, both physical and mental. She described feelings of hopelessness.
I cannot move away. If I move away, I couldn't even come back. Like the ceiling, there's water keep leaking from the ceiling. I live in the top floor, so whenever there's water leaking, I wouldn't say anything to the landlord. I just put the bucket there so that the water can sit there. I just have to endure this, and there's no hope. Like, if you can get into a program where we pay 30% of income on rent, that would help a bit. But then it doesn't seem like I'm gonna get it. If I'm gonna keep the way like it's right now, I just have to keep enduring the safety concern, the health issue, and everything else.
Another demographic disproportionately affected by the lack of affordable housing is people of color, who make up 3/4 of San Francisco's extremely low-income residents. Caroline Fang, Chief Community Real Estate Officer at the Mission Economic Development Agency, talked about their displacement at a recent panel about the measure hosted by KALW and the San Francisco Public Press.
We've seen with the changes in San Francisco a real loss, as folks know, displacement and gentrification of our Black and brown households. And so at the core of extremely low-income households, in addition to our most vulnerable in terms of age, are also our most vulnerable in terms of race. And so being able to keep the diversity of San Francisco is really critical to this proposition also.
The measure is supported by a multiracial, multilingual coalition of community-based organizations, as well as the entire Board of Supervisors and incumbent Mayor London Breed. But Proposition G is not without its detractors. Opponents take issue with the measure's funding mechanism, which they say limits officials' flexibility when drafting the city budget. City Controller Greg Wagner noted in a nonpartisan analysis of the measure that it's not in compliance with a non-binding city policy intended to limit set-asides. Larry Marceau, who is against several local propositions this election, criticized this one for, quote, draining critical resources from essential services like public safety, infrastructure, and education. However, the reality is a little more complicated. Fang noted that the money for Proposition G doesn't have to come from the city's general fund. Instead, it can draw from existing tax revenues already earmarked for rental subsidies.
The great thing about it is it's not adding extra taxes to our voters, and it's merely setting aside a certain amount within the city budget that we actually have revenues for, because we'd passed, for those of you who've been active in other election cycles, you know that we've also passed a couple of different measures, including a transfer tax as well as a vacancy tax over the years. So we actually have housing revenue measures that could be used towards this that allows at least this to definitely go towards extremely low-income households.
All in all, Wagner estimated the measure would cost between $161 million and $222 million over 20 years, depending on the city's financial health and decisions by the mayor and board of supervisors. Several supporters, including Weisenberger with Young Community Developers, pointed out that the set-aside is minimal relative to the city's overall budget.
This proposition is only $8.5 million every year, when even in a budget crisis, the city's at $14 billion for our budget. So, this isn't even a slice of pie. This is a crumb, when the city could be doing so much more even within a budget crisis.
In the meantime, San Francisco is facing increasing pressure from the state to build more housing, and fast. Annie Chung, executive director of Self-Help for the Elderly, talked about state housing requirements at the panel.
We need to build 82,000 units of both market rate and affordable housing by 2031, right? And when we looked at the real statistics, that we are building, 1,000 plus units maybe a year. So I don't know how we're going to ever build 36 or 46,000 affordable housing units by 2031. If we don't start to really push the city, our mayor and our board of supervisors and our policymakers to address this critical need for affordable housing for the low income and the extremely low income.
She also noted the physical and emotional effects that safe, affordable housing has on older adults.
Elderly's health literally becomes better when they lived in a permanently subsidized affordable housing. Their blood pressure comes down, they're much more happier, they no longer just look at themselves, what they need, they start to reach out to other residents and become volunteers.
Proponents like Romero hope that Proposition G will help some of those people find housing they can afford and set San Francisco on a new path for funding extremely low-income units.
This is a measure that will have an impact on real people, and it will have a real impact on our housing systems, and also that it's a first step of many to be able to say that we are doing the best we can to help seniors and people with disabilities and families who have for a long time been left behind, who for a long time have been suffering, and that this program will alleviate that.
I asked whether Proposition G goes far enough to address the problem, given that the city needs to plan for 14,000 extremely low-income units in the next 7 years.
I will say, that's 500 more families who will not be rent burdened, who will be able to very comfortably pay for groceries. And that makes me really happy.
Devon hadn't heard of Proposition G. When I explained what it was and how it worked, she was dismayed to hear that there would only be limited units available through the lottery, because she's already been waiting for so long to find truly affordable housing. She said she wants to see people who've been on the waitlist longer prioritized, and talked about how many people are already competing for a tiny number of units.
When new housing is open for people to apply, there's just too many people. And I know people who would wake up in the middle of the night, like about 3 a.m., just try to get an application form. It's not even like a guarantee that you're gonna get in, just to get the form. You're gonna wake up at 3 a.m.
Weisenberger acknowledged that the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund won't solve the affordability crisis, but said it would be a step in the right direction.
This isn't the golden bullet, the fix all, but it's a start to at least giving folks an opportunity to apply. This is about setting a precedent for kind of building in affordability into our affordable housing system in San Francisco. This would be the largest single expansion of affordability in San Francisco's history in our affordable housing system. So, it's something for us to build off of. I mean, I think 500 units isn't enough. I think everybody will tell you it's not enough. It's not going to cover the entirety of the need, but it's something for us to build off of. We're creating this fund, and then we can, in the years to come when maybe budget situation isn't so tricky and there's not other kind of priorities on the table for legislators, I think that we can come back and find ways to add money to that fund and, build on those 500 units and turn them into 1,000 and 2,000 and so on and so forth. So we make sure that our affordable housing system is serving everybody that needs housing.
Heisler, the campaign manager for Yes on G, is also hoping that the fund could be a model that inspires municipalities across the state.
We don't want to minimize how much we're going to accomplish. I think the exciting thing is that we're creating a container that can make this immediate impact and we can build on it in the future. But even getting to the point of this being a real program that the city has an obligation to fund has been a challenge. The issue of affordable housing not being quite affordable enough is not a San Francisco specific issue. The affordable developments across the country use the same programs. And so we are hoping that in addition to directly serving hundreds of households in San Francisco and starting to address the problem here, we are also going to be able to understand better the nature of this issue and prove that this is a productive intervention, it's a good use of public money, and that the solution can work elsewhere. It's a regional issue, it's a state issue, and we're excited that we're actually taking a step towards addressing it.
In the meantime, extremely low-income seniors like Devon, as well as people with disabilities and families, continue waiting for safe, affordable housing.
For older people with poor health condition like us, it feels like we are on a downhill slide, right? Our hope is that when it comes to housing, people will consider those of us with such a low income level. We want an opportunity to enjoy our final year.
For more information about other propositions on this November's ballot, check out our nonpartisan voter guide at sfpublicpress.org. I'm Madison Alvarado, and you've been listening to Civic. Civic comes to you from KSFP LP 102.5 FM in San Francisco, a project of the San Francisco Public Press, a nonprofit investigative newsroom. Find the companion article for this episode and all our reporting at sfpublicpress.org. Special thanks to my colleague Zhe Wu for providing interpretations for this episode. Our theme music is by John Dillon. Additional music was supplied by the Blue Dot Sessions. Our team includes producer Liana Wilcox, KSFP Program Director Mel Baker, and Executive Director Lila LaHood. Civic airs Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on KSFP. New episodes on Thursdays. Thanks for listening.